Most Aussies blame foreign investors for high house prices. Struggling would-be homebuyers want answers. Struggling would-be homebuyers want answers. The droves of people getting knocked back for mortgages and outbid at auctions would love someone to be held accountable for skyrocketing house prices. But it turns out we are blaming the wrong people. Most are pointing the finger at foreign investors, with more than a third, 34.9%, of Aussies claiming the number one cause of high house prices is foreign investor demand, according to a national survey conducted by Rate City. Less than half that, 16.5%, blamed local investors and another 16% said low interest rates were driving up prices. But while blaming someone else might be easier, we are all guilty of it. The problem is a lot closer to home. Foreign investment on the decline. Since the Australian government announced a crackdown on rogue offshore buyers skirting the rules, foreign investors in Australia are only allowed to invest in newly built property so they can aid supply, not restrict it. The number of overseas property pundits has dropped off steadily. Foreign buyers were behind just 1 in 10 new property purchases in the third quarter of 2016, according to NAB's latest residential property survey. This is the lowest level the survey has recorded since mid-2012. In Australia's most competitive housing markets, NSW and Victoria, foreign buyers accounted for 8% and 15% of new property sales, respectively. But property prices have kept rising nationally. House prices were up 10.9% in the 2016 calendar year, according to CoreLogic, the fast growth since 2009. Peter Arnold, Rate City's Data and Insights Director, said it isn't surprising we are quick to blame offshore buyers, but it is disappointing. It is not as simple as that, Mr. Arnold told news.com.au. People have been pointing the finger at foreign investors for a long time, but there is so much more to Australian housing affordability than just foreign investment. The bigger problem is actually closer to home. NAB's survey shows local investors increased their share of all new property sales over the quarter, rising to almost a quarter, 24.4%. And that doesn't include first homebuyer investors. First homebuyer investors accounted for 12.2% of new developments, a bigger proportion than foreign investors. When it comes to established property sales, local investors accounted for 20.6% of the market and first homebuyer investors made up 10.6% of all existing home sales. Meanwhile, figures released this week by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS, show home loans to investors rose 4.9% in November, up 21% on a year prior. People hear anecdotal reports about particular instances of foreign investment and think that is the problem, Mr. Arnold said. We do have a lot of foreign investors, but we also have a lot of investors in general. One of the interesting parts of the research was that 44% of local homeowners with an investment property said foreign investor demand is the main cause of high house prices. They didn't think they were a part of it as well. Just 16.5% of domestic investors admitted they felt they were contributing to booming prices. Investment is not all a bad thing. It is good for creating rental options, but investors are a huge part of our market, Mr. Arnold said. Investors currently make up 40% of all housing finance commitments, according to the ABS figures. In 1996, investors accounted for 28%. It's time. Housing affordability is obviously a complex issue which extends beyond investors, both foreign and domestic, and changes geographically. However, Mr. Arnold believes addressing the treatment of property investors is a good place to start dealing with the problem. There is no silver bullet to housing affordability. There is a number of well-thought-out options, but I think now is the time to be looking at the tax treatment of investment properties and doing it while rates are still at historic lows. Doing that when rates are high, when more people have interest to negatively gear, it will be more of a shock to the market, Mr. Arnold told news.com.au. Negative gearing reform was widely debated and became a hot-button issue of the federal election last year after Labor proposed a polarizing policy to restrict negative gearing to new housing stock and also slash the capital gains tax from 50% to 25% if it was elected. But the coalition was quick to rubbish the proposal, saying it would make it tougher for first home buyers and would drive up rent. It is something that needs to be done very carefully, but it has got to at least have a more thorough look, Mr. Arnold said. He added that boosting appropriate housing supply should also be a priority. We want supply that doesn't go to the extreme. Some of the worst housing bubbles in history have been caused by having too much supply. But we don't want restrictions in getting new houses to market. We want some reliable standards governing what property developers can release as new properties. There has been a growing amount of concern over the amount of apartment developments, particularly across the heated eastern seaboard cities, with fears we are fast-tracking ourselves into the dangers of an oversupply. Julia.corduroy@news.com.au